9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're looking at a true crime case. One that's both fascinating and incredibly sad.
Yes, very sad. The Bennett Family Massacre.
What?
And one of those cases that you don't forget.
Yeah, get ready, because this one has twists and turns you won't believe. I mean,
like
decades.
Decades. It's remarkable how this case really highlights the advancements in forensic science.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll see how DNA technology, combined with just the dedication of these investigators, ultimately led to the perpetrator being brought to justice.
It is incredible.
After decades.
So we're going back to 1984 in Aurora, Colorado.
Okay.
Picture a young family. Bruce and Deborah Bennett and their 2 daughters, 8-year-old Melissa and 3-year-old Vanessa.
A beautiful family.
They were living what seemed like the perfect life.
Yeah.
And had just bought their first house. Bruce was training to become an air traffic controller, and they were both active in their family's furniture business.
Yeah, they were really, striving, living the American dream.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's this detail about the garage door being left open during Melissa's birthday celebration.
Oh, yeah.
That was mentioned by one of the uncles. Looking back, it's almost like a chilling foreshadowing of what was to come. Open garage doors become a recurring theme in the attacks that follow.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's like a dark thread running through this whole story.
Yeah.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. It was January 16th, 1984, the day after Melissa's birthday party. Bruce's mother, Connie, went to their house to check on them when they didn't show up for work.
Yeah.
What she discovered was absolutely horrifying.
Unimaginable. I can't even, it's one of those things you read and you just think, I can't believe that happened. The brutality of the crime scene is truly difficult to grasp. Bruce was found at the bottom of the stairs.
Oh my God.
And Deborah was in the bedroom. Both had severe head injuries from blunt force trauma. The level of violence inflicted, particularly the hammer blows and signs of sexual assault, is just staggering.
It's hard to even imagine. And poor little Melissa had been beaten and stabbed.
Yes.
But amidst all this horror,
there was a small glimmer of hope. 3-year-old Vanessa was found alive, although she was barely clinging to life.
And that is a miracle that she even survived this attack. This is where we really see the limitations of forensic science back in 1984.
Right.
DNA technology was still in its very early stages. Investigators meticulously collected evidence like fingerprints, blood-stained boot prints, clothing carpet samples, all of which would become crucial years later.
Wow.
But at the time, the tools they had were limited.
I can't imagine the frustration they must have felt. And meanwhile, little Vanessa was fighting for her life in the hospital. Doctors weren't even sure if she would survive. She had a shattered jaw, broken bones, and the unimaginable trauma of the attack. It's a miracle she pulled through.
It really is. While Vanessa was struggling to survive, the investigators began to notice a disturbing pattern. The attack on the Bennett family wasn't an isolated incident. Just days earlier, a young couple, James and Kimberly, had been attacked in their Aurora home. An assailant wielding a hammer entered through their open garage and brutally assaulted them. That's terrifying. So there were already signs that this wasn't a random act.
Exactly. And then just a week later, there was another horrific attack. This time, the victim was 50-year-old Patricia Smith, who was found murdered in her Lakewood home. Again, the attacker had entered through an open garage, used a hammer, and there were indications of sexual assault.
These similarities are just chilling.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like the investigators had a serial attacker on their hands.
It certainly did. And these weren't the only attacks. On the same day that Patricia was murdered, a flight attendant named Donna was attacked in her garage, also with a hammer.
My gosh.
The level of brutality and the recurring open garage detail were creating a wave of fear in the community. The FBI profiler working on the case was convinced this individual wouldn't stop until he was caught.
It's like something straight out of a nightmare. Did they have any leads at this point?
Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, the investigators were hitting dead end after dead end. Fingerprints weren't leading anywhere. DNA technology was still very limited, and there were countless false leads. It seemed like the case might remain unsolved.
So how did they finally catch a break in this case?
Well, there was one small glimmer of hope back in 1990 when a single pubic hair was found at one of the crime scenes. But unfortunately, due to the limited technology available at the time, the hair was actually destroyed during the analysis.
Yeah.
It was a huge setback.
Oh my gosh. That's devastating. But eventually, DNA technology did advance, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. A major breakthrough came in 2001 when DNA technology had advanced enough to finally identify the source of the samples from the crime scenes. And here's the crucial part. They were able to exclude all family members.
So at that point, they knew they were looking for someone outside of the family. But how did they find this person?
This is where the case takes a fascinating turn. In 2018, a genealogist was brought in to help analyze the DNA evidence. Within a week, she was able to find a match in a public database, someone with the last name Ying. This narrowed the search down to a pool of 40 individuals in Aurora with that last name.
Wow, finding the right person out of 40 individuals still seems like a daunting task. What did the investigators do?
The detectives were incredibly persistent. They meticulously reviewed the profiles of each individual, comparing their details to everything they knew about the perpetrator. And finally, in July of 2018, they found their match.
So they finally had a name. Who was this person?
His name was Alex Ying, and he was an inmate serving time in Nevada for a series of violent crimes. I remember how the profiler had suspected that the perpetrator might have a background in construction?
Yeah.
Well, it turned out that Alex had worked construction in Aurora and Lakewood right around the time of the Colorado attacks.
Wow, what are the chances? It seems like everything was finally starting to fall into place, but I'm guessing it wasn't as simple as just arresting him.
You're right. The detectives knew they had to be smart about how they approached Alex. They couldn't just accuse him outright, especially considering how much time had passed. They needed to get him talking, and they came up with a clever plan to do just that.
This is getting really interesting. What did they do?
They went to Nevada and interviewed Alex under the pretense of being something other than law enforcement officials. During the interview, Alex spoke about his past and even mentioned that he'd worked construction in Aurora and Lakewood, confirming his presence in Colorado during those critical months.
So they were subtly leading him into revealing his own presence in Colorado at that time? Did he suspect anything?
Doesn't seem like he did. Then they started showing him photographs. At first, they showed him black and white photos of the Colorado crime scenes. Alex denied any involvement. Then they showed him a color photo of Patricia Smith while she was still alive. He continued to deny knowing her, but then they showed him a color photo of Patricia's body after she had been murdered.
Oh, wow. I bet that changed things. What happened next? Tell me you're not going to leave me hanging.
Don't worry, we'll dive into all the details of what happened next in part 2 of this deep dive.
Okay, so last time we left off with the detective showing Alex that picture of Patricia Smith's body.
Right.
What happened when he saw it?
Oh, his whole demeanor changed. You could tell he was caught off guard. He became visibly agitated. He panicked a little bit. He kept insisting that there must be some kind of mistake.
So it sounds like he was really caught off guard by that photo.
Oh, he definitely was.
Yeah.
And the detectives, seeing this shift in his behavior, really pressed him for more information. You know what's going on here. Do you recognize her? And Alex, realizing that he'd slipped up, immediately asked for a lawyer.
Yeah, smart move on his part. I mean, at that point. But it was too late, right?
They had him.
Exactly. They already had his DNA from the Nevada prison, and they had witnessed his very telling reaction to Patricia Smith's photograph. So they returned to Colorado and immediately got a court order to obtain a new cheek swab from Alex for DNA comparison.
Okay, and I'm guessing that new DNA sample was a match to the evidence from the Colorado crime scenes?
It was a perfect match,
Wow.
confirming Alex Ying as the perpetrator of both the Bennett Family Massacre and the murder of Patricia Smith. After decades of mystery, they finally had their man. That must have been a huge relief for the families and the investigators who had worked tirelessly on this case for so long. But I imagine getting Alex back to Colorado to face trial wasn't an easy process.
You're absolutely right. Extradition is a very complicated legal process, and Alex's lawyer fought hard to delay his transfer. It actually took over a year of legal battles before the Nevada Supreme Court finally ordered his extradition to Colorado.
So even with Alex in custody in Colorado, there were still hurdles to overcome. I mean, so much time had passed. Could they even prosecute him for all the attacks?
That's an excellent question, and it brings up a really important legal concept called the statute of limitations. Basically, this means there's a time limit on how long the state has to file charges for certain crimes.
So that means some of the attacks, like the one on James and Kimberly and the attack on Donna, the flight attendant, they couldn't prosecute him for those because too much time had passed.
Precisely. However, the murders of the Bennett family and Patricia Smith fell under a different category. The law in 1984 allowed for life sentences without the possibility of parole for those crimes, meaning there was no statute of limitations.
Got it. So they could finally bring Alex to justice for those horrific murders.
Yes, but it definitely wasn't going to be easy. The Bennett family trial began in July of 2021. The prosecution built a very strong case, largely based on the DNA evidence and the chilling similarities between all the attacks.
I remember reading about Connie Bennett's testimony during the trial. It must have been incredibly difficult for her to relive that traumatic experience of finding her son and his family.
It was truly heartbreaking. Her testimony was very powerful, and you could see that the jury was deeply moved by her words. The defense tried to raise doubts about the DNA evidence, claiming it might have been mishandled, and they also pointed to the lack of fingerprints at the scenes.
But wouldn't the lack of fingerprints actually support the idea that the perpetrator was someone like Alex, who had experience with breaking and entering and knew to wear gloves?
That's exactly the argument the prosecution made. They contended that Alex was experienced enough to know to wear gloves, which would explain why there weren't any usable fingerprints at the crime scenes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Did Alex himself say anything during the trial?
He mostly remained silent, only speaking when he was directly addressed by the judge. Just kind of stone-faced.
Wow.
The jury deliberated for a long time and even reached a point where they were deadlocked on a decision. But in the end, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts.
So after all those years, justice was finally served. What was Alex's sentence?
The judge, clearly disgusted by the horrific nature of Alex's crimes, sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his life in prison.
Wow, 3 life sentences. That really emphasizes the severity of his crimes. What about the case involving Patricia Smith? Did he face trial for her murder too?
Yes, he did. Patricia Smith's trial began a few months later, but was initially declared a mistrial. Alex's defense attorney requested a mental competency evaluation to determine if Alex was fit to stand trial.
Oh, so they had to figure out if he was mentally competent before they could continue with the trial.
Exactly.
So even though he'd already been sentenced to life for the Bennett family murders, he still had to face trial for Patricia's murder as well.
That's right. Ultimately, he was deemed mentally competent to stand trial, and in April of 2022, the trial resumed. The outcome was the same as in the Bennett case, a guilty verdict and another life sentence. At that point, it was more symbolic than anything else, given that he was already serving multiple life sentences.
It's hard to even begin to imagine the impact these crimes had on the surviving victims, especially on Vanessa. She was so young when she went through such a horrific experience.
Vanessa's story is one of incredible resilience and strength. She endured years of both physical and emotional pain, struggling with things like depression and addiction. But she eventually found a path towards healing and recovery.
That's so inspiring to hear.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that she was able to find a way to heal. Did she ever make any public statements about Alex's capture and conviction?
She did, and it was a very powerful statement. She said that while his capture brought a sense of relief, it didn't truly bring her peace. The damage had already been done, and nothing could erase that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's a stark reminder that even though justice can be served, the trauma of these events linger.
Exactly. But hopefully, the fact that the perpetrator was caught and held accountable can provide at least some measure of closure and healing for the families and survivors.
This whole case really showcases how crucial it is to never give up hope. Even after all those years, advancements in forensic science, the incredible work of the investigators, and the help of genealogists all came together to bring justice.
It's a testament to the power of perseverance and the unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth no matter how long it takes.
You know, we've talked about the DNA evidence and the genealogy, but there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't really touched on yet. Whatever happened with those boot prints? The ones found at the Bennett's home.
Ah, yes, the boot prints. Remember how the investigators initially suspected that the perpetrator might have a background in construction?
Yeah, of course. And Alex did work in construction in that area. Did they ever officially connect those boot prints to him?
That's where things get a little unclear. There aren't any official reports that I've seen that definitively link those boot prints to Alex Ying.
That's really strange. It seems like such a crucial piece of evidence. Why wouldn't there be any follow-up on that?
You're right. It is odd. It makes you wonder if there's more to the story than we know.
I love how these deep dives always leave us with some lingering questions. It makes you want to keep digging and exploring.
Speaking of digging deeper, maybe it's time we shift gears and talk about...
Hold on a second. We're not done yet. We still have a lot more to discuss about this case. So those boot prints, they just sort of disappeared from the narrative.
It makes you wonder if maybe there were some challenges with forensic analysis back then, or perhaps some details were intentionally left out of the official reports.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer of mystery to this already complex case. You know what else I think is really fascinating? The fact that they used genealogy to crack this case wide open. It's some seriously cutting-edge technology, but it also raises some interesting questions.
Absolutely. This case really shines a light on how much criminal investigations have evolved. Using genealogy and DNA databases opens up a whole world of possibilities for solving cold cases, cases that might have remained mysteries forever. But it also makes us confront some pretty complex questions about, balancing individual privacy with public safety.
That's a really good point. I mean, it's amazing that they were able to track down Alex Ying using DNA and public databases, but what about the implications for everyone else whose DNA might be out there? Could someone end up becoming a suspect in a crime they had absolutely nothing to do with simply because their DNA is in a database somewhere?
That's a valid concern. And it really raises questions about how much control we have over our own genetic information. As these technologies become even more powerful and more widely used, we really need to think carefully about establishing clear guidelines and regulations to protect individual rights while still allowing law enforcement to use these tools for legitimate purposes.
It seems like a tricky balance to strike. On one hand, you have the potential to solve these terrible crimes and bring closure to families who have been waiting for justice for years. But on the other hand, you have the potential for misuse of this information and the erosion of privacy.
It's a debate that's not going away anytime soon, and it's one that we as a society need to engage with thoughtfully and critically. We need to carefully consider both the benefits and the risks of these technologies and figure out how to harness these incredibly powerful tools in a responsible and ethical way.
So what do you think this means for the future of crime solving? Are we heading towards a world where everyone's DNA is in a database and privacy is a thing of the past?
Well, I mean, that might be a bit of a dystopian view, but it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility. The technology is definitely moving in that direction. But I think it's more likely that we'll see a continued evolution of the legal frameworks and ethical guidelines surrounding the use of genetic information in criminal investigations.
So it's not just about the science itself, but also about the societal and legal implications of how we choose to use that science.
Exactly. It requires a nuanced and ongoing conversation about where we draw the lines. It's a topic that deserves our attention and careful consideration.
Well, this has been a really incredibly thought-provoking deep dive. We've explored a truly horrific crime, learned about the advancements in forensic science, and grappled with some really complex ethical questions.
It's amazing how a combination of scientific progress, sheer determination, and sometimes a little bit of luck can lead to justice being served even after decades.
If you're interested in learning more about this case, I encourage you to, delve deeper, explore the court records, and think about the wider implications of using genealogy in criminal investigations. It's a fascinating subject that raises a lot of important questions.
And remember, there's always more to learn, more perspectives to consider. Stay curious.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.